What's up, Planeswalkers? This is Eric from Bane Alley Magic with another deck tech video. Before we start, I just want to remind you to please like and subscribe. So without further ado, here's Thantis, the Warweaver. So this is Thantis, the Warweaver, which is a legendary spider with 5 power, 5 toughness. She is 3 generic mana and Jund colors to cast, which means a black, a red, and a green. Thantis has vigilance and reach, and she says, all creatures attack each combat if able. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, put a +1/+1 counter on Thantis the Warweaver. So, Thantis, I've played a few games with his deck, and she has done phenomenally. It wasn't what I expected, though. I definitely thought I'd be able to get her out early and just have everyone kill each other while I sat back and, drank some tea, but it wasn't that easy. I definitely had to plan when I cast her. There's obviously going to be many moments where you don't want her on the board because you're not ready yet. You don't have the certain cards you need to protect yourself, and maybe your opponents have tons of creatures that you can't block, so obviously in those situations you don't want Thantis out. So it's a special card, and it's a really special way of playing the game. That's what I really love about it. It's so much fun. But I've found it also draws a lot of hate, so be ready for that. People don't like being manipulated. They don't like it when you say, you have to do this, you have no choice. And people aren't going to realize it at first. These decks came out not too long ago, but as the months go by and more Thantis decks emerge, I know that it's going to be drawing some hatred. Yeah, people are eventually going to see Thantis and be like, go after that guy. So we got ways to deal with that, thankfully. And that's, it's what the deck expects, right? If all creatures attack each combat, since they don't like attacking, they're going to attack us out of spite. They're going to come after us. And even if you use, I feel like, the curse cards, I feel like that's always a risk, because you're like, yeah, attack each other and I benefit, and sure, you get a benefit too, but everyone knows that the person who cast the curse is the one getting the big benefit. So I didn't include a lot of cards that you might expect. I don't have any of the hunted cards, because they stink. They really suck. And people think maybe this would be a good deck for them. No. There's almost no good deck for those cards. So, yeah, the hunted cards, I did actually try them. I gave them a shot in the deck, and they didn't work. They did what I thought. They gave my opponent's creatures, which my opponents used to mess me up. And so, I'm not a fan of the hunted creatures. And I also didn't use many of the curses, because, like I said, you really don't know how the curses are going to go a lot of the time, so I wanted something a bit more consistent. So instead, sort of the strategy I went with are, creatures obviously that I don't care about attacking, creatures that have maybe indestructible, or creatures that have really great effects when they do attack. Also, what's really great in this deck are mana dorks, alright? Little guys who just tap to add mana, or any creatures that have activated abilities, because once you tap them, they don't have to attack, right? Because they're tapped. So, let's get into it. Starting with the mana base. I technically have 38 lands in the deck, but one of the lands isn't counted towards my main mana base. So, really I have 37 lands, and then one land that doesn't happen to add any mana in my mana pool. So I'm not counting that land towards my mana base. That land's going to come up later. So, we got 37 lands, including, I think, 7 swamps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 swamps, 7 forests. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then we got like 5 mountains only. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have less mountains because just, mountains are more our later game colors. In early game, we want to have the black and green going. And then we got some dual lands. You watch most of my videos, you'll notice that, you know, I have a lot of commander decks, so my dual lands have started to become spread thin, and so sometimes I have more budget options, sometimes I have more powerful options, you know. Obviously, whatever deck you go with, you want to go with the best lands you can get. You want lands that can do things, utility lands. I really should put a Reliquary Tower in here, but I ran out of them. So Reliquary Tower would be a fine addition to this deck. Also, you know, anything, that land that lets you get all your creatures back that your opponents control, you know, would be a good one for this deck too. So continuing, we got a Rootbound Crag, adds green or red unless you can, and enters tapped unless you control a forest. Spire Garden enters tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents. Sheltered Thicket enters tapped, but you can cycle it. So, as I always say, cycling lands are fabulous additions for any commander deck. I actually was so mana flooded the other day. I was so mana flooded, and I cycled like 4 different lands, thankfully. Some of the lands I had were cycling lands, and that kept me in the game. Golgari Rotform, this is a bounce land. As I always say, when you play a bounce land, make sure the land that you're returning to your hand is a land you've already tapped for mana and one that's going to re-enter the battlefield untapped. So that's Golgari Rotform, adds green and a black. Llanowar Wastes, taps to add a colorless, or it taps to add green or black, and if you do that, it deals 1 damage to you. Woodland Cemetery, enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a swamp or a forest, and it adds green or black. Jungle Hollow enters tapped and you gain 1 life, and it taps to add green or black. So this is an example of one of the budget lands, you know. I'm running out of expensive dual lands, so apologies for that, people, but you know what to do. Put in the good lands. Like these, Hissing Quagmire enters tapped. It adds green or black, but it also, you can pay 3 mana and turn it into a 2/2 black and green elemental creature with Death Touch. So for every color combination, there are creature lands like this, and I think they're good choices. Especially since with Thantis, they don't have to attack. Alright, in fact, let's put up Thantis. Everyone can see her beautiful eyes. Lovely eyes are staring at you. Okay, whoa, sorry. Not easy to do. Okay, thank. Alright. Anyway, continuing. We got Rogue's Passage, which is a land that makes any creature unblockable. Yeah, even your opponent's creatures. Super useful. Temple of the False God, I put this in like every single deck. Never have regretted it. Forgotten Cave, Cycle Lands, alright? So I have all the Cycle Lands of the Jund colors that only need 1 mana to cycle. So we got the Forgotten Cave, we got Barrenmoor, and Slippery Karst, which I grabbed by accident. Heshep Oasis is a desert, which I've got a few deserts in here. Not for any particular reason other than that they help out by doing things. So I might end up adding some desert synergy later, like that land, that spell that lets you look for 3 deserts and get 2 zombies out of the deal. But for now, we got Heshep Oasis. It's a desert, taps to add colorless. You can pay 1 life and tap it to add a green, or you can pay 1 generic and 2 green, tap it, sacrifice a desert, which can be Heshep Oasis itself, and target creature gets +3/+3 until the end of the turn. Activate this only time you can cast a sorcery. So, you know, in a deck that cares about combat tricks, I thought this was a good addition, as well as Desert of the Indomitable for some cycling. We got Ramanap Ruins, which is a desert, kind of like Heshep Oasis. It can add colorless, you can pay a life and add a red mana, or you can pay 2 generic and 2 red to sacrifice a desert, and it deals 2 damage to each opponent. So it might be a way to just, you know, finish somebody off. And some more lands, Bloodfell Caves. Bleh. Why even describe it? Don't get a Bloodfell Caves. Luxury Suite enters the battlefield tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents. These are great cards from the Battle Bond set. And now into the creatures. So, we got some creatures that I don't care if they attack, right? Scorpion God, you can attack all you want, and if you die, you come back to my hand at the beginning of the next end step. This also counts as some kind of removal. I normally never put Scorpion God in a deck, but, you know, I looking at it, I figured he actually fit really well in here. I mean, you know, he kills things, he draws you cards, he doesn't die, you know, he's spooky. So I thought he was really cool. Thantis and the Scorpion God, you know, arachnids for life, right? For sure. Then we got, going out of order, I have plenty of gods. I guess we're going into the Mana Dorks now. Like I said, Mana Dorks are great in this deck. because you can choose to tap them for mana instead of attacking with them. So we got Druid of the Cowl, just slightly better than Llanowar Elves. You know, I'm really iffy about 1-drops when I could just have a 2-drop that has bigger toughness, because in Commander that makes a huge difference, you know, whereas, you know, in 1v1, sure, you want that Llanowar Elves turn 1, but in Commander you don't care if your Mana Dork comes out turn 2, you know, especially if it has a bigger butt and it's able to stick around longer, give you more mana in the late game. Deathcap Cultivator, kind of the opposite, but it does have extra abilities. So it's a 2/1 for 2, taps to add a green or a black to your mana pool, but if you have Delirium, it gets Death Touch. So makes for a good blocker. Naga Vitalist is one of generic and a green for a Naga Druid. It's a 1/2, and it taps to add 1 mana of any color that a land you control, or of any type a land you control could produce. So theoretically, you could even generate colorless mana with Naga Vitalist. Wayward Swordtooth is fabulous in this deck because, you know, if you don't have the City Blessing, he doesn't have to attack, right? So he's 2 generic mana and a green for a 5/5 dinosaur. I actually have a few dinosaurs in this deck, which do really well in the deck. So he has Ascend, which means if you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. And you can, you know, play this card and then get 10 or more permanents, and then you get the City's Blessing. It's not like you have to have 10 or more permanents right when you play this card. And you may, Wayward Swordtooth says you may play an additional land on each of your turns, and it's a 5/5 that can't attack or block unless you have the City's Blessing. So he's mono ramping, he doesn't necessarily have to attack, and, you know, hell, even when he does, he's a 5/5, not bad. Yavimaya Elder, more mana dorks. So Yavimaya Elder is 1 generic and 2 green for a human druid, 2/1, and he says when Yavimaya Elder is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may search your library for up to 2 basic lands, reveal them, and put them into your hand if you do shuffle your library. And you may also pay 2 generic mana, sacrifice Yavimaya Elder, and draw a card. So we got multiple effects on one card here, which is great. We got card draw, and we got ramp. Now into some more gods. Nilia, God of the Hunt. 3 generic and a green for a legendary enchantment creature god. Indestructible 6/6. As long as your devotion to green is less than 5, however, Nilia doesn't count as a creature. So each green mana symbol in the mana cost of permanents you control counts towards your devotion to green. And Nilia says other creatures you control have trample, and you can pay 3 generic and a green mana to give target creature +2/+2 until the end of the turn. And so she's already given the creatures trample, and this way she's also given the creatures +2/+2. And like I said, in this deck, I love having indestructible creatures because, you know, having them attack is great. We don't care if they always attack. More gods. Ronus the Indomitable, 2 generic and a green for a 5/5 legendary god. I mean, again, 3 mana for a 5/5 is great. And Death Touch Indestructible. Ronus the Indomitable can't attack or block unless you control another creature with power 4 or greater, which Thantis is. And if you pay 2 generic and a green, another target creature you control gets to +2/+0 and gains trample at the end of the turn. Very similar to Nilia, God of the Hunt, you know, this last ability. Nilia's is a little more expensive, but she also gives the additional toughness, so that's the argument for that. But Ronus, I was playing with this card the other night with the Thantis deck, and he was killing it. Man, he was really killing it. He's a great card. I had no idea. And people discount the Death Touch when it comes on a big creature, but can't tell you how many times there's a bigger creature out there than a 5/5, and having Death Touch is relevant. Erebos, Dieu des Morts, or Erebos, God of the Dead in English. I liked getting the French version of this card because, you know, I speak a little French, and, you know, I am a little French, and also, this is a card I feel like most people should know what it does at face value. So if you don't know, Erebos, God of the Dead is 3 generic and a black for a 5/7 indestructible god. Enchantment creature. If your devotion to black is less than 5, he's not a creature. And Erebos also says your opponents cannot gain life, but you can pay 1 generic and a black and pay 2 life, and you get to draw a card. So he draws you cards, he prevents your opponents from gaining life, and so pretty sweet addition to literally any black deck, really. Just the ability to draw cards is fabulous, but also messing up your opponent's plans is a great bonus on a 5/7 indestructible. Mogus, God of the Slaughter, is bringing us towards the end of our gods. We didn't include all the gods in the deck because they don't all synergize well, but I thought Mogus did great. He's 2 of anything and a black and a red for a legendary enchantment creature god, 7/5 indestructible. If your devotion to black and red is less than 7, Mogis isn't a creature. And at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, Mogis deals 2 damage to that player unless he or she sacrifices a creature. So we got more removal here, more damage. Most of the time, your opponents are going to be taking that 2 damage, but as the game progresses, they're not going to be able to keep taking 2 damage over and over and over again, you know? They're eventually going to be sacrificing some creatures. So, that's good. Also, just having a 7/5 indestructible attacker is never bad. So, here's a name that's hard to pronounce. Jedit Ojanen of Efrava. Yeah, I think I got it. Jedit Ojanen of Efrava is 3 generic and 3 green for a legendary creature cat warrior, which is another 5/5. You know, lots of 5/5s apparently in this deck. And he's got Forest Walk, which means this creature can't be blocked as long as the defending player controls a forest. So the odds are in your favor that there's probably going to be at least 1 player with the forest in the game. Probably more like 2 players. You know, sometimes there's going to be no player with a forest, then fine, but he still has another cool ability. Whenever it attacks or blocks, create a 2/2 green cat warrior creature token with Forest Walk. So anything that makes more creatures and replaces itself is worthwhile, I think, in the deck, and I think he definitely synergizes because anything with any kind of island walk actually goes really well in this deck, or even anything with evasion goes well in this deck because it can attack without getting killed, you know? There's a lot of glare going on here. I'm just going to remove Thantis. Continuing, Thrashing Brontodon, another dinosaur. 1 generic and 2 green for a 3/4. And Thrashing Brontodon says pay 1 mana and sacrifice it to destroy target artifact or enchantment. And just having this ability on a 3/4 body is fabulous. You know, it's going to stick around, and you can always respond to abilities by paying the 1 mana. You don't have to tap it to do it, so it can do it right away when it comes out. Very cool addition to any green deck, actually. I mean, this and Reclamation Sage are both great. I kind of am liking Thrashing Brontodon more than Reclamation Sage lately, just because of that big body, you know, just the ability to stick around. It's so easy for Reclamation Sage to die. You know, it's just so easy for it to get dealt 1 damage, and there you go. Reclamation Sage is gone. But Thrashing Brontodon, the other night, this was getting in damage. You know, it was dealing... it dealt at least 6 damage in the game, and then I had to sacrifice it, you know, and that only took 2 combat steps, whereas with Reclamation Sage, that would have taken an extra combat step, and, you know, I mean, also, you know, it wouldn't have had, it only has a toughness of 1, so would it have even attacked any of those times? Probably not, so, alright, continuing, Runic Armasaur. I know you're all like, what? Well, hear me out real quick, okay? This is a card that everyone was freaking out about when it first came out. They thought, like, oh, it's going to be really good. And then it ended up whiffing. It didn't really do anything. It hasn't seen any play. I drew a foil version of it. I've been looking for somewhere to put this card, and I think this deck is actually where this belongs, so hear me out, all right? So we got 1 generic and 2 green for a 2/5 dinosaur, and it says, whenever an opponent activates an ability of a creature or land that isn't a mono ability, you may draw a card. So the reason I think this is going to work in this deck is because people don't want to attack, right? But Thantis says they have to attack. So one of the ways people are going to get around attacking is by activating abilities of their creatures. And so basically Thantis is going to encourage our opponents to activate those abilities, which is going to encourage Runic Armasaur's ability to trigger. So hopefully Runic Armasaur finds a place in this deck. I haven't seen him in action yet, you know, he hasn't drawn me any cards yet because I haven't been able to play him yet, but I can't wait till I do and find out what happens. And if you have any experience with Runic Armasaur, leave a comment below. Let me know what you think of Runic Armasaur, if it can go in any other deck, because I'm really interested. Alright, more dinosaurs. We got Polyraptor, 6 generic and 2 green, another 5/5 with Enrage. Whenever Polyraptor is dealt damage, create a token that's a copy of Polyraptor. And just having your opponent's creatures need to attack each turn actually clears the way for Polyraptor just enough to make it a fabulous addition into this deck. You're definitely going to be able to connect with somebody with Polyraptor, or, you know, I mean, and so it doesn't, you know, automatically make a token, right? But, I mean, it is gonna be something that your opponents are gonna want to deal with. They're gonna want to deal damage to it. I think, you know, if they have any blocker available, you know, they're going to do it. But I think just basically it clears the way so the really big creatures are out of the way, and if they are going to deal it damage, it's not going to be enough damage to kill it. You know, I think it does go well in this deck. I'm having a hard time explaining why, but I think it is going to be a good addition to this deck. Another dinosaur, Ghalta Primal Hunger. I mean, a 12/12 for 2 mana. How can you go wrong? Okay, normally it's 12 mana to cast, but it costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control, and it has Trample. So it's 10 generic and 2 green, but if you have 10 power on the board, it's only 2 green mana for a 12/12 Trample. Never regretted playing that. More dinosaurs! Yeah, it's a good dinosaur commander. Etali Primal Storm, 4 generic and 2 red for a legendary Elder Dinosaur, 6/6. Whenever Etali Primal Storm attacks, exile the top card of each player's library. Then you may cast any number of non-land cards exiled this way without paying their mana costs. So you are able to cast many spells in commander games when you get Etali out, and now you're going to have to attack with her, and no one can blame you. Alright, Giant Adaphage is almost better than Polyraptor in this situation, because just like Polyraptor though, Giant Adaphage has the way cleared for him to get through to make sure he's going to be dealing combat damage to somebody. Not that, that was much of an issue for him before. I mean, the guy's a 7/7 trample after all for 7 mana, and Giant Adaphage says, whenever Giant Adaphage deals combat damage to a player, put a token on the battlefield that's a copy of Giant Adaphage. So you get more 7/7s with trample that make more 7/7s with trample that make more 7/7s with trample, and this is definitely going to be a game-winning condition. And like I said, especially in this deck where your opponents have had to attack, that means your opponents are automatically going to have less blockers, and this guy is going to be getting through and dealing that damage. Hornet's Nest is our one defender in the deck. I hear some people built defender versions of this deck. That doesn't sound as exciting for me, so I did put in one though, because I think it's a really good addition. Hornet's Nest is 2 generic and a green for a creature insect, though it looks like a hornet's nest to me, and it's a 0/2, and whenever Hornet's Nest is dealt damage, put that many 1/1 green insect creature tokens with Death Touch onto the battlefield, and flying. So it's a fabulous blocker that creates more and more fabulous blockers. Alright, now let's just move the cards up. Alright, so continuing. Noxious Gearhulk is 4 generic and 2 black for a 5/4 menace construct. And when Noxious Gearhulk enters the battlefield, you may destroy another target creature. If a creature is destroyed this way, you gain life equal to its toughness. So this is just filling up a removal spot really, but I also wanted to have it on a big creature so that we could get him with damage, and you're gaining life. This is filling multiple slots in the deck, honestly. It's a creature, it's a removal spell, it's a life gain spell. Really a great addition to any black deck. Really, no reason not to include a Noxious Gearhulk. Vorapede is one of our few vigilance creatures in this deck. You would think we would have more creatures with vigilance, but not really. We just have creatures that we don't care if they attack. But Vorapede's our vigilance guy. He's 2 generic and 3 green for an insect with vigilance and trample, and it has Undying, so when this creature dies, if it had no +1/+1 counters on it, return to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. So I thought that was a great ability, because also we don't care if this guy attacks and dies, because it comes back and it gets bigger, and it also has vigilance, so it can still block. Great addition to the deck. And Thantis, I guess, just likes bugs and, creepy, crawly things in general. Kazul, Tyrant of the Cliffs. So this guy's in here because this is a deck that draws hate, like a lot of decks out there. But I know once people catch on to what we're doing, we're forcing them to attack, they're going to be coming after us. And so we need cards like Kazul. So 3 of anything and 2 red for a legendary Ogre Warrior, who's a 5/4. And it says, whenever a creature an opponent controls attacks, if you're the defending player, put a 3/3 red Ogre creature token onto the battlefield, unless that creature's controller pays 3. So they have to do this for every creature that's attacking you. It doesn't say whenever 1 or more creatures. If it said 1 or more, then we would only get 1 ogre out of it. But now we're getting a 3/3 ogre, which can block for every single attacking creature. I mean, that's just huge, and this guy is going in a lot of my decks, which have been getting hate. So I'm putting it in the Nicol Bolas deck, for example, because people hate discarding cards. Next we got Avenger of Zendikar, which is a staple in green, but this deck it works great too, because it's 5 generic and green, 7 mana total for a 5/5 elemental. When Avenger of Zendikar enters the battlefield, put a 0/1 green plant creature token on the battlefield for each land you control. And it also has landfall, and that means whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature you control. So the idea with this is, to get the most value out of it, is you play this card before you play your land for the turn. And so that once you play your land for the turn, all those tokens you just created all get +1/+1. The most common mistake with this card is you play the land first, and then you play it, and then all your creatures remain 0/1s. You know, that's the most common mistake with landfall in general. If you have any cards that say landfall, remember to try to play the land after you play the spell with landfall, you know, to make sure you get the landfall trigger going. Sorry, my dogs are barking. They're cool. Let me just tell them to be quiet. Hey! Quiet! So, continuing. Dragon Lair Spider is 2 generic, 2 red, and 2 green for a 5/6 spider with reach. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, put a 1/1 green insect creature token on the battlefield. So this is one that I'm always thinking about putting in a deck, and I don't. You know, I always take it out and put something else in. But in this deck, I think it's really important because it gives you those blockers. You know, this deck needs lots of blockers because people hate you and they want to attack you, and you're making them attack you. So, you know, get a Dragon Lair Spider for this deck. I think it's going to work out great. All right, next we got Rakdos, Lord of Riots, 2 black and 2 red for a legendary demon. It's a 6/6 with flying and trample. You can't cast Rakdos, Lord of Riots unless an opponent lost life this turn. And if you're forced to attack, you know, it's easy to get your opponents to lose life. Another great addition in the deck because, like the other cards, the path is clear for you to deal damage. You know, your opponents have all attacked, which means they have less blockers, which is more likely you're able to deal them damage, which makes them lose life, which means you can finally cast Rakdos at a normal pace. And Rakdos also says, creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each 1 life your opponents have lost this turn. So if Rakdos gets in for 6 damage, each other creature spell you cast that turn is 6 less generic mana to cast. So he's a ramp spell on a creature. You know, he's another mana dork. Nah, he's much more than a dork. Mitotic Slime. Who doesn't love this card? This is 4 generic and a green for a ooze creature token. That's a 4/4. It says when Mitotic Slime dies, create 2 2/2 green ooze creature tokens that have, when this creature dies, create 2 1/1 green ooze creature tokens. So a little army in a can here, and it helps out a lot. You know, when you're attacking and your guys are dying, you need those blockers. You know, this is another creature that we don't mind that it has to attack each turn because we almost want it to die, so we can get more guys. Vivictus Asmati, the Dire, is 3 of anything and Jund colors, and it's a 6/6 flyer, Elder Dragon. Whenever Vivictus Asmati, the Dire, attacks, for each player, including yourself, choose target permanent that player controls. Those players sacrifice those permanents. Each player who sacrifices a permanent this way reveals the top card of their library, then puts it on the battlefield if it's a permanent card. Yeah, this is insane. This is absolutely insane. You are choosing what they sacrifice. So this gets around hexproof. Well, no, it doesn't get around hexproof. Sorry. But it does get around indestructible. It doesn't matter if they're indestructible. This gets around that. And so, yep, they got to sacrifice it. And you choose what they sacrifice. I don't know. It's just bonkers. And then, yeah, they get to put the top card of the library on the battlefield. It's a permanent. Lots of times, it's not going to be a permanent. Lots of times, it's just going to be a land, you know? Most of the time, it's going to be something that's not as bad as the thing you blew up. So Vivictus is an awesome card. Kind of a crazy card. Definitely a decent choice to swap out as a commander, too. Stormbreath Dragon. It's 3 of anything and 2 red for a flying haste protection from white dragon. So protection is also good because it gives us a bit more evasion. So if it has to attack, it'll probably get through. And it has monstrosity 3, so you pay 5 generic and 2 red. And if this creature isn't monstrous, put 3 +1/+1 counters on it and it becomes monstrous. And Stormbreath Dragon also says, when Stormbreath Dragon becomes monstrous, it deals damage to each opponent equal to the number of cards in that player's hand. So a great burn spell, great attacker, and overall just super cool looking. Look at that artwork. Gotta love it. So you might notice we have a lot of flyers in the deck. You know, we want big creatures that can get through without being blocked. So here we have Khazarov, Sangir Pureblood, which is 5 generic and 2 black. I thought this was a great addition to the deck too, because even though he's a 4/4 flyer, he also has, whenever a creature an opponent controls is dealt damage, put a +1/+1 counter on Khazarov, Sangir Pureblood. So if we're forcing all of our opponent's creatures to attack, they're going to be taking more damage than they normally would, and Khazarov is hopefully going to be getting huge. And also, he just has the ability to pay 4 mana, 3 generic and a red, to deal 2 damage to target creature. So, you know, he can just make himself bigger. This is a great bomb there. Getting to the end of the creatures, we got Varchild, Betrayer of Keldor, one of the new commander cards, 2 of anything and a red for a 3/3 human knight, which says when Varchild, Betrayer of Keldor, deals combat damage to a player, that player creates that many 1/1 red survivor creature tokens. Survivors your opponents control can't attack, or can't block, and they can't attack you or a planeswalker you control. And when Varchild leaves the battlefield, gain control of all survivors. So you're giving your opponent's creatures which can't attack you, and they can't block. So the only use that these survivor tokens have for your opponents is to attack your other opponents. So this is perfect in the deck, 1,000 times better than any hunted card. Yeah, Varchild. Varchild works great in this deck. That's the strategy we want. And now for the last creature, Dread. 3 of anything and 3 black for a creature elemental incantation. A 6/6 with fear, which means it can't be blocked except for by artifact creatures or by black creatures. And Dread says whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, or deals any kind of damage to you, destroy it. And when Dread is put into a graveyard from anywhere, shuffle it back into its owner's library. So this definitely discourages our opponents from attacking us. If we can get Thantis and Dread out and keep them out, that's game over. You know, nobody's going to be attacking us unless they can get lethal on us. So they are all going to be attacking each other. Dread is such a perfect choice for this deck. There's another enchantment that does the same thing. I forget what it's called, but it's really expensive, so I didn't get it. But Dread is just fine. Get Dread instead. So now on to our spells, and just like Dread, we're moving on into spells that protect us, right? That keep opponents from dealing us damage. So Sandworm Convergence is perfect for this deck. It is absolutely perfect. 6 generic and 2 green for enchantment that says creatures with flying can't attack you or planeswalkers you control. And at the beginning of your end step, create a 5/5 green worm creature token. So it's important to recognize that it says end step, not upkeep, because the very turn you cast this, you are going to get a 5/5 green worm creature token, which is important. What's funny is the other night someone played Archetype of Imagination, which gave all of his creatures flying, and then I played this, which meant none of his creatures could attack. That was really cool. So this protects you on the ground with the creature tokens, and it protects you in the air because they just can't attack you at all in the air. And now into some fog effects. That's right, this deck has about 5 different fog effects. We already looked at Sandworm Convergence, I'm counting as 1. And we got several just straight fog spells. And fog spells, if you don't know, are spells that prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. So, of course, our opponents have to attack. They're not happy about it, so they're going to attack us. But we want them to know, hey, if you attack me, you're not going to deal any damage. You know, just FYI. I mean, we don't want them to know, maybe. But it's one way we can deter them, you know, let them know there's no point in attacking them, you know. But maybe actually I wouldn't recommend telling them you have a fog. You know, fog is more of a trick. You trick them. So I forget I said that, but yeah, include fogs in this deck. This deck needs the fogs. It's fabulous. So we got Lull, and whoop, no surprise. We got Fog itself, 1 green mana, prevent all combat damage to be dealt this turn. Also, I should say about Lull, it also has Cycling, which is great. The reason I included it. And Arachnogenesis is an instant speed spell for 2 generic and a green. It says put X 1/2 green spider creature tokens with reach onto the battlefield, where X is the number of creatures attacking you. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn by non-spider creatures. Whoa, this is like so flavorful and synergizes perfectly with Thantis because it's a fog and it gives us more spiders. And it says prevent all damage that non-spiders would deal. So those spiders that you cast can just kill something too, you know, and they can effectively block anything because they're not dealt any damage either. So, yeah, unless your opponent is attacking you with a million spiders, this is the perfect spell in the Thantis deck. Gotta love Arachnogenesis, and yes, I did use it the other day, and it was bonkers. So, on to Darkness, alright, which is 1 black, an instant that says, creatures attack and block as normal, but none deal any damage. All attacking creatures are still tapped. Play any time before attack damage is assigned. So this is a long way of saying prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. It's Darkness. It's a fog effect on a black card. Yeah, if you didn't know, now you know. Very cool spell. Perfect for Thantis because we're playing black. Alright, and then Disrupt Decorum is not a fog, but I mean, it's almost the same thing. It says, goad all creatures you don't control. Until your next turn, those creatures attack each combat, if able, and attack a player other than you, if able. And it's 2 generic and 2 red to cast this sorcery, by the way. What's really cool, it says they attack a player other than you, if able. So that means they can't attack your planeswalker. They have to attack a player. And so, obviously in a 1v1 game, this card is terrible. But man, in multiplayer games, this is just going to disrupt the decorum. It's going to cause the chaos. It is the perfect addition for the Thantis deck. And then our last fog effect, or spell that protects us, is the Glacial Chasm, which you saw was kind of out of order there. So Glacial Chasm is a land. This is the land I was talking about that I don't include towards my mana-producing lands because it doesn't produce any mana. So it says cumulative upkeep 2 life, which means the turn after you play this, you have to pay 2 life or sacrifice it. Then the turn after that, you got to pay 4 life. The turn after that, you got to pay 6 life, and so on. So that's the cumulative upkeep. And a couple more downsides. When Glacial Chasm comes into play, got to sacrifice a land. And also, you cannot attack. None of your creatures can attack. But here's the upside. All damage dealt to you is reduced to 0. Alright, so with the deck Thantis, you're going to be drawing a lot of hate. People are going to be attacking you. So with this out, there's no reason for them to, because all damage dealt to you is reduced to 0. And this is a card I put in any deck that receives hate, because, you know, when you got 3 different players attacking you, this is the card you need. You need all that damage to be reduced to 0. It doesn't matter if the cumulative upkeep is 2 life, because that's still going to be less life than you would be losing if all 3 players on the board are going to be attacking you. So Glacial Chasm, such a fabulous card. And I also have, I haven't shown it yet, but Expedition Map is in the deck, which will help us fetch up Glacial Chasm. So, continuing on to some spells that just protect creatures directly. You know, we want to protect Thantis, so we got Lightning Greaves. It's a 2/2, it's a 2 to cast artifact equipment. It's 0 to equip, and it says equipped creature has haste and shroud. Darksteel Plate is 3 of anything to cast for an artifact equipment. Darksteel Plate is indestructible, and the equipped creature is also indestructible. And it's 2 to equip. So protect our Thantis, protect our big guys. So they got to attack. And let's throw in Heroic Intervention. This is 1 generic and a green for an instant that says permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until the end of the turn. So basically, you can't touch them. All right, our stuff is good. If anyone tries to board wipe, you want to use Heroic Intervention. Yeah, really good, really good green card. Kind of goes in any green deck if you can afford it. It's going up in price. Right now, though, is probably the cheapest time to buy it because it's just about to be rotated out of standard. All right, so the time we're recording this video, which is, you know, Wednesday, September 19th, 2018. All right, get Heroic Intervention as soon as possible. We got a few Planeswalkers. Vraska Relic Seeker is 4 generic and a black and a green for a legendary Planeswalker. Vraska enters with 6 loyalty counters. You can +2 to create a 2/2 black pirate creature token with Menace. You can -3 to destroy target artifact, creature, or enchantment, and then you get to create a colorless treasure artifact token, which has tap to sacrifice it and add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Or you can -10 to make target player's life total become 1. Yeah, that -10 ability is the main reason I put her in the deck, because if someone's life total becomes 1 and all creatures have to attack each turn, that player's not going to live very long. And, you know, also just creating tokens is super good. Also, you know, creature tokens, that is. Also, just destroying things is really good. This -3 ability is really powerful, because not only are you destroying something, but you're also ramping at the same time, and that helps a ton. So Vraska Relic Seeker, super good card. Got Knot of the Bone to help us protect our life total, because, you know, people are going to be attacking us. So 2 generic and a green for an instant. You gain 2 life for each creature card in your graveyard, and it has flashback for the same cost, 2 generic and a green. I actually played this card the other night, and it saved me. It totally saved me. I would have been dead. Would have been completely dead, but nope, I had knotted the bone, and I had been holding it since my opening hand. Thrilling Encore is 4 generic and a black for an instant. Says put onto the battlefield under your control all creature cards in all graveyards that were put there from the battlefield this turn. So this is a response to a board wipe. You get all the creatures that died. Rise of the Dark Realms might be a little better, but this is cheaper to cast, and I really want to try this out. I haven't got it off yet. I was actually about to get it the other night. I was about to get Thrilling Encore off and gain control of all the creatures, and someone blew up my land like the turn before the board wipe. It really sucked. Like I had 5 mana open to respond to the board wipe, and someone played something that blew up a land, and they're like, I'll just destroy Eric's open mana. Like, I had just enough to cast Thrilling Encore, but didn't happen. So we'll give it another day in court, see what happens. Some more removal, or into some removal spells now. Battle at the Bridge is X and a black for a sorcery that has Improvise, which says your artifacts can help you cast this spell. Each artifact you tap after you're done activating mana abilities pays for 1 mana. And Battle at the Bridge says target creature gets -X until the end of the turn, and you gain X life. So it's a removal spell, and it gains us life, which is pretty important in this deck. Star of Extinction, 5 generic and 2 red for a sorcery, destroy target land, and Star of Extinction deals 20 damage to each creature and each planeswalker. Sweet! Get rid of those problem lands too. Vonus Hunger is 2 of anything and a black for an instant speed spell, which has Ascend, and each opponent sacrifices a creature. If you have the City's Blessing, instead, each opponent sacrifices half the creatures he or she controls rounded up. Great little removal. And one of the most powerful cards in the deck. I'm so happy I had an extra one, because these are up to like $20 now, so you should get one as soon as possible, because it's going to be going up in price. A Chromos Memorial is 7 generic mana for a legendary artifact, and it says creatures you control have flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, haste, and protection from black and from red. This card is perfect for the deck because we need things that give all of our creatures vigilance, which, you know, it's very hard to find in these colors, things that give all our creatures vigilance, because we're not playing white. So this is the perfect addition to the deck. We need Chromos Memorial. Harvest Season is the first of our ramp spells. 2 of anything and a green for sorcery. Search your library for up to X basic land cards, where X is the number of tapped creatures you control, and put those cards onto the battlefield tapped. Then shuffle your library. So, music. Need some more Ennio Morricone. Alright, so in this deck, you're going to have a lot of tapped creatures, presumably, because, you know, you're, oh no, my music's not working. Sorry. So, there we go. So, you have a lot of tapped creatures, you're going to be getting a lot of lands at a Harvest Season. Alright, Somatic Compass is 2 generic for an artifact. You pay 3 generic and tap it. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. And at the beginning of your end step, if you control 7 or more lands, you get to transform it. And so what do we transform it into? Hey, Shaundra. Not Shaundra, no. We transform it into Spire of Orazca, which is a land that can tap to add colorless, or you can tap it to untap target attacking creature an opponent controls and remove it from combat. So this is our little fog effect. We get to remove a creature from combat if it happens to be attacking us. We want to deter people from attacking us. So I'm going to flip this card back over. And then we're going to talk about Shaundra, Torch of Defiance. 2 generic and 2 red for a Planeswalker. Shaundra enters with 4 loyalty counters, and she has 4 different abilities. +1 to exile a top card of your library. You may cast that card. If you don't, Shaundra deals 2 damage to each opponent. Or you can just +1 to add 2 mana to your mana pool. 2 red mana, that is. You can -3 to have her deal 4 damage to target creature. Or you can -7 and you get an emblem. Whenever you cast a spell, this emblem deals 5 damage to target creature or player. All really good abilities. Most of the time I'm just using this to either ramp or draw cards. And this is Renewal. Is 5 of anything and a red, and it's a sorcery, and it says search your library for up to 3 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. You gain 7 life. So this is great. We're getting 3 lands onto the battlefield and we're getting 7 life, which, as I've said many times already, it's important that we gain life in this deck. And we want to ramp hard because we've got some big creatures to cast. There's our expedition map. 1 generic for an artifact, which says pay 2 generic and tap it, sacrifice it, search your library for a land, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. And as I said before, this is going to be searching up Glacial Chasm most of the time. We got Soul Ring. We got Hedron Archive, 4 generic for an artifact that taps to add 2 generic to your mana pool, or you can pay 2 generic and tap it, sacrifice it, and draw 2 cards. So we got draw cards and mana ramp on a single card here. I think that's pretty important. Underworld Connections is our cheaper version of Phyrexian Arena, but it's also almost better because we have control over it. So if we're down to 1 life, this isn't going to kill us because we have to pay, or we have to tap a land to activate it. So it's 1 of anything and 2 black for an enchantment aura. You enchant a land, and enchanted land has tap to pay 1 life and draw a card. Gotta draw cards. Collective Defiance is 1 generic and 2 red for a sorcery, and it has escalate 1. Pay an extra 1 for each mode chosen beyond the first, so choose 1 or more. You can have target player discard all the cards in his or her hand, then draw that many cards. You can have Collective Defiance deal 4 damage to target creature, or you can have Collective Defiance deal 3 damage to target opponent. So you can have all 3 of these happen if you pay an extra 2 mana. And so most of the time, I put this in the deck for card draw, but actually the other night I definitely used it to deal that extra 3 damage to my opponent's Frost Titan. Man, that creature's annoying, Frost Titan. What a good card. Next we got Necropotence, which is 3 black mana for an enchantment. It's got some downsides. You gotta skip your draw step, and whenever you discard a card, you gotta exile that card. But the upside is, at any time, as many times as you want, you can pay 1 life, then exile the top card of your library face down. Put that card into your hand at the beginning of your next end step. So you can draw tons of, you can pay 20 life and draw 20 cards off of this. If you have Reliquary Tower, you don't have to discard any of them. Unfortunately, if you have to discard them, you have to discard them into exile. And if your opponents are playing the spell, make sure they remember that. It's something that people forget all the time, that they have to discard into exile. And they have to skip their draw step. But man, being able to fill up your entire hand again, all the way back up to 7, with no repercussions except for paying a little life, is fabulous. So this card is great. You know, eventually you will get to a point where you really wish it wasn't there, because when you're really down on life, you know, you can't pay any more life. So hopefully you have a lot of life to pay. Otherwise, you might want to destroy this before, you know, it prevents you from drawing any more cards because you skip your draw step. Vance's Blasting Cannons is another enchantment for 3 of anything and a red. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may exile the top card of your library. If it's a non-land card, you may cast that card this turn. Whenever you cast your 3rd spell in a turn, you may transform Vance's Blasting Cannons. So most of the time, we're just using the first ability. But if you happen to flip it, it becomes Spitfire Bastion, which is a legendary land, and you taps to add red, or you can pay 3 mana and tap it to deal 3 damage to target creature or player. Pretty sweet extra bonus. Mind's Eye is an artifact for 5 generic, and whenever an opponent draws a card, you may pay 1. If you do, draw a card. So, you know, definitely a good draw card spell since we're outside of blue. Continuous card draw. Alright, so we did include the Vows in here. 1 card this deck is missing is Assault Suit. I really wish I did have Assault Suit, but I haven't gotten it yet. But I do have all 3 of the Vows. So Vow of Lightning is 2 generic and a red for an aura. It says enchanted creature, gets +2/+2, has first strike, and can't attack you or planeswalker you control. So obviously you enchant these onto your opponent's creatures, and those creatures can no longer attack you, and they get buffed up, which is sweet. Vow of Wildness is the same casting cost, except it's green. Enchanted creature gets +3/+3, has trample, and can't attack you or planeswalker you control. And the black one is Vow of Malice, also 3 mana to cast for an enchantment. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2, has Intimidate, and can't attack you or planeswalker you control. So Intimidate is very similar to Fear. Intimidate means this creature can't be blocked except for by artifact creatures or creatures that share a color with it, whereas Fear is can't be blocked by artifact creatures or it can only be blocked by artifact creatures or black creatures. And Giant Adaphage means that's the end of the deck list. So let me know what you think, guys. Would you do what have you done differently? I'm sure everyone's doing something differently. But what do you think of the cards? Yeah, that's it for today. So until next time, take care. Take it easy.